Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webcast. As part of the Canon webcast series on optimizing your business processes, today's program will provide you with insight on how to reduce your department's paper processing costs with intelligent data capture. We're excited to have everyone with us today, and we appreciate that you're able to take the time out of your schedule to join us. I'm Anne-Marie Carchia, Marketing Director here at Canon Business Process Services, and I'll be your moderator for today's program. Before we get started, I do have a few quick housekeeping notes. We are recording today's session, and we'll have the webcast available on demand for those unable to join us today. Also, to eliminate background noise, all participants have been muted. You will only be able to hear the presenter speak. If you would like to ask a question, you may do so at any time by clicking the chat button on the WebEx dashboard on the right side of your screen. Type your question, click send, and we'll try to address your question before the end of the program. And because we only do have limited time here today, there is a chance we may not be able to get to everyone's questions. If we are unable to address your question during the live program, we will be sure to follow up and address it after the program directly with you. And we'll talk through the agenda. Okay, so as part of our webcast series, today we will be discussing how to reduce your department's document processing costs with intelligent data capture. Today's session will first cover what is intelligent data capture, then we'll move on to the use cases, then 5 steps to help you reduce your document processing costs, how to assess the level of benefit you'll get from rethinking how you process information, managing the program, and then intelligent data capture in action with case studies. We will have Q&A at the end of the session. I'd like to just take a moment and introduce Canon Business Process Services to those of you in the audience that are not familiar with us. We have been serving Fortune 1000 companies and law firms for over 30 years and offer a wide range of business process outsourcing solutions to help clients build stronger and more agile businesses. You can see the range of services that we provide here on the slide. We focus on designing, managing, and continuously improving business process operations utilizing the right combination of people, process, and technology. We offer customized solutions that can be delivered on-site, off-site, or offshore. We go beyond cost reduction to enable businesses to run better and operate more efficiently. Over the past 11 years, Canon Business Process Services has been recognized as one of the top 100 global outsourcing providers by the International Association of Outsourcing Professionals. And now I'd like to introduce our panelist for today, Gary Allen. Gary is a solutions engineer here at Canon, serving the information management industry for 15 years. He has a proven track record of designing solutions in the realms of imaging, records management, managed print, and mailstream for clients across a range of vertical markets. For a good part of his career, he focused on the investment banking industry, where he designed, built, and managed national imaging and record services. Gary, we're so glad to have you with us today, and thank you for carving out this time to share your expertise and insights with us.
Well, thanks, Anne-Marie, for that wonderful introduction. And thanks to everyone online for joining today. We're going to do our best to make today's webinar as informative and fun as possible. Well, to start off, I'd like to begin with a definition of what we mean by the term intelligent data capture. Intelligent data capture, or IDC, is the process of automatically scanning traditional long-form documents or electronic pages, extracting specific data points regardless of their structure, and then pushing that information to drive downstream workflows and systems. That's great. So what does that mean in terms of benefits? Well, if done correctly, IDC should save time in end-to-end processing. Likewise, the time saved should also reduce overall costs. The ingestion of useful information earlier and more reliably in the process should, as a result, improve customer experience, and the elimination of unnecessary manual data entry will improve the data quality. And lastly, we should be able to wrap more security controls around the technology to meet today's increasing compliance needs. So why does intelligent data capture matter? Here's a quote from Gartner. 80% of intelligence is trapped inside unstructured, unmanaged documents. What does this mean? Well, the majority of useful information does not take advantage of processes and technologies to move into workflow systems efficiently. Trapped does not necessarily mean stuck forever, but really a bottleneck, which is hindering the flow of information. Now, downstream systems which could be affected are ERM systems for your accounting departments, client management software, business intelligence dashboards, or private or public cloud repositories that are used for collaboration. So what do we mean when we talk about structure? I wanted to clarify what's meant by document structure, and here we have a simple line graph which represents the level of technology needed to extract data from a document. The left being less advanced, and as we move to the right, the technology needs to make more decisions, and as a result, needs to be more robust. So on the left are the structured documents. These are documents where the information needed is in the same place every time. A good example of this would be forms. So you have your government forms such as I-9s or medical HCFA forms, the 1500s, SF50, or any industry or company-wide forms that you might have. Now moving a little bit to the right are what we call semi-structured documents. And for these, the information is in the same general location, but may move around somewhat depending on the origin. So in this category, things like invoices, purchase orders, and bills of lading, each company would provide the same information types, but the organization of that information is going to vary from company to company. Now, as we move all the way to the right are what we call unstructured documents. The needed information could be anywhere within a document. These would be your contracts and correspondences, your reports and proposals. In this case, the technology would need to make more complex decisions to extract the data. So how is data actually coming into your business? So information enters your business in multiple formats. Technology has actually increased the number of formats, not simplified them, as was thought a decade ago. And data comes in through traditional paper documents still, faxes and e-faxes, you have emails and attachments, office documents like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and then you have your PDF documents, which could be scanned or created as PDFs, and then we have structured data, and that would be your e-forms or mainframe data. Yes, that still exists today, and potentially data from mobile applications. This influx of data can be compounded by multiple locations.
Thank you, Gary. That takes us to our first poll question. We very much want to hear from our audience today. The poll question is, what is your top document management pain point? Would you say it's long document processing times, delayed customer response times, poor information accessibility and sharing? Would you say it's the unnecessarily high labor costs, lots of manual data entry, or other? We'd very much like to hear from you. We'd take a few seconds here and get your responses. And just a few seconds more. I see we are getting a good level of participation. Thank you, everyone. Just wait a few more seconds. Okay. All right, well, Gary, according to what we're seeing here, we're seeing for the most part lots of manual data entry at 50%, and then the next one is poor information accessibility and sharing at 28%. Are you surprised by that?
Yes, just a little bit. Generally, when we're dealing with clients, they come to us, and their main pain point is actually cost. They're usually looking to lower their costs, and as a secondary pain point, they're usually talking about their service level. So that would be the second type of pain point that we normally see. So that's a little bit surprising, but it's still in the realm of what we generally deal with on a day-to-day basis. So with that, I think that makes a great segue into the next phase, where we're going to talk about a little bit more in depth about the extraction process, the whys and hows. So why do we extract data? Well, we extract the data to drive downstream processes and systems. In this example, we're looking at an accounts payable solution. We're using this as it's one of the functions that spans just about every type of organization. This example is actually very similar to an investment bank client I had a few years ago when extraction technology was not as robust as it is today. The client had already moved their approval processes offshore, but needed a solution to get their invoices into the system faster. They were trying to move from a 7-day turn to a 2-day turn for the ingestion process. They also needed to lower their on-site headcount. At the time, I believe they had approximately 12 staff handling this influx of invoices. So on the capture side, they were looking for the standard data points that you have here. They were looking for the vendor name, invoice number, date, line items, which is how much of what was provided, and then a purchase order, if any. Now, this was huge because once validated, a purchase order invoice under a certain amount could be paid without a departmental approver, and that could mean a difference for them of as much as a week in terms of processing. And then the information would then flow into their ERP system, which would then trigger the approval workflow. So really quickly, after the system was up and running, we were able to move the capture process to 1 day, and they were able to repurpose all but 2 of their staff who handled the exceptions. See, that's the potential value of data extraction. So how does it work? Well, at a very high level, here's basically how the process functions. Data comes in, as we've discussed before, in multiple formats and locations. The information is captured using some type of scanning technology, and that's hardware and software. Then OCR, or optical character recognition, is applied at that point, and then the real magic begins. Data is extracted using what we call business rules, namely how is the document recognized, what information is needed from the document type, how is the information identified, where does it go, and in what format. So next we're going to look at 5 steps to implement an intelligent data capture solution. Step 1, centralized intake. Now, this is perhaps the most important step in the process of implementing a data capture solution. It's imperative to, firstly, understand where the useful information is coming from and what are the formats. As you can see under the challenges, one of the challenges is that there is an influx of information, various locations, and various forms. So what can you do to alleviate some of this? Well, the first thing to do is to identify what type of business model you want to use, whether an on-site or on-premises model or an off-site model. You want to know what is the structure you're going to use to wrap this around. Now, we'll discuss some of the pros and cons of each later in the presentation, but after that, depending on the model you choose, you want to designate the point of capture and begin to consolidate the information streams through that point. The reason for this is, A, you want to ensure that all the useful data will be handled by the new workflow. You don't want any outliers. And then B, you want to remove any duplication of efforts where possible. It's important to note that centralization does not have to disrupt ongoing processes that need to stay in place. For example, invoices may be sent to different locations, and the organization itself may want those individual locations to maintain control of their vendors. So the invoices could be scanned locally at, say, a multifunctional device, and then those electronic images could then be automatically routed to a central point for processing, keeping the local workflow intact. So after intake is when the capture step actually begins. So a challenge here is capture systems of this type can represent a large net new investment, so if not already in place. So some of the more complex software systems don't deploy easily, and most client IT departments don't have a lot of experience with them. So as a result, professional service costs from vendors can accumulate. Now, you can mitigate this by doing a couple of things. First, you can use a phased approach. Identify the important channels and or the locations and bring them online one at a time. In this manner, you can purchase fewer licenses and reduce your installation time and associated costs. Or secondly, you can leverage a partner, and this can be done regardless of the centralization model that you've chosen in step one, but especially if you're using an offsite model. This way, you're taking advantage of their technology and infrastructure, almost like a software as a service solution.
I see that we have a write-in question for you, Gary. Let's see. We don't have the technology for this. What do you recommend as the next step to evaluate technology?
Well, that's a great question, and it's something that we receive a lot. Really, you don't want to focus on the technology first. You really want to focus on what your goals are. Because when you start comparing technology, you can go down the path of comparing the various features of the technology and not really focusing on what works for you. I would suggest in that situation that you find a partner that will help shepherd you through the process, evaluate what your needs are, and then select the technology solution that works best for you.
Okay, thank you, Gary.
So moving on to the third step, the document classification and validation. So the first challenge hurdle here is making sure you have explicit rules to identify and classify the document types. Frequently we find that manual processes, especially legacy ones that have been around for a long time, may not have specific written rules for classification. For example, how do you identify a PO invoice from a non-PO? Does the PO number have to be on each invoice? Also, some unstructured documents may normally be read to determine what it is. You find this when processors tell you they need to look through the document to make a determination. So what do? Well, you begin writing the rules for classification, starting with the low-hanging fruit first. Now, that could be the most important or the easiest to classify documents, and then for processors, and then for unstructured documents, you might want to do some analysis. You can sit with the processors, find out what keywords or phrases they look for when trying to classify documents, and then also from the technology side, you can leverage what we call clustering. Now, this is a machine learning technique where documents are scanned into the system, and then the system automatically groups documents together that have similar characteristics. Then the groups are reviewed and corrected, and over time, with enough input, the system can identify the document types without the need to code a series of complex rules. So after classification, we come to the actual data extraction. So the challenges here are current processes may use manual data entry, which, being labor-intensive, are costly, they can be error-prone, and then it's not scalable. Why? Because there's an upper limit to how many characters an individual can key in a given period of time. Also, if there is a need to bring more processors online, the learning curve for training new people is going to differ from person to person. So what you can do to resolve this is, firstly, you want to determine the necessary data points and the rules for finding them, similar to documenting the classification. If there are any database tables or spreadsheets with data, they can be leveraged in this phase as well. Then you can have the software extract the needed data with clear rules. And then finally, you want to assign manual steps only to those processes that are exceptions. And then step 5, you want to get the data out to where it's actually being used. So you need to get that data exported. So the challenges here are that custom links from the capture systems the downstream platforms like your ERP or your repositories or your workflow systems can be expensive to create and usually involve some professional services. And for some clients, that cost may be prohibitive. So to help alleviate some of those pitfalls, here again, it's documentation. You should document the requirements for the downstream systems. They may be able to accept information in different formats than you first expected, and maybe an out-of-the-box export from the capture system will work. And then you can also use the phased approach here. Similar to the ingestion step, one connector at a time, reducing the amount of professional services needed at once. And then lastly, you can leverage a partner with some experience. They may have a connector that works as is, or one that could work with just a few changes. Well, now that we've dug a bit into the process, let's take a look at some use cases. So, data capture and insurance. Well, here we have an insurance case. This particular client had about 10,000 claims per month that they needed to capture. They received the forms in several formats. They had some created PDFs, they had some scanned typewritten forms, some faxes, yes, they still got actual physical faxes, and some handwritten forms. Well, the good thing was that they received the forms into their main location, so centralization of the inbound stream was a simple step for them. But they needed to decide on a model. They ended up deciding on an offsite model for processing due to space considerations and overall cost. So step one was to capture the typewritten and electronic generated forms automatically. Then we wrapped some business rules around the extracted data that would move the majority of the forms down the approval workflow, lowering their adjudication costs, and then only manually touching those forms that were handwritten or actually had data issues. So in this way, we were able to reduce the processing times, which would help them both from a business need and a compliance requirement. This particular example is interesting because it's a case where the client needs only the extracted data and not the actual document images. So there are a lot of different ways that we could apply data capture. So next we have a manufacturing client. So here, this manufacturing client had a great deal of vehicle and dealer files. So this is an example of unstructured data that they needed to digitize. So it was approximately 3 million pages. Now their challenges were that they had, they had multiple locations where the documents were stored. They needed a secure central repository, but they didn't want to manage it or install it on their environment. And although they were fine with some of the files being imaged off-site, some of the more sensitive documents had to be scanned right there in place. So for this one, we set up a temporary scanning operation on site for the sensitive documents and then ingested the other documents in an off-site facility. We were able to capture the data points that are on screen. So it was, for them, it was VIN number, employee name, vehicle type, year, region. And then we also set up a cloud storage system for them with document level security to meet their needs and imported the documents directly to it. So once the documents were either scanned or shipped, they never touched them again. And then a separate entity was created in the repository for each location to provide yet another level of security. This project was scheduled for approximately 6 months and was completed just under that mark. And much of that time was really spent managing the logistics of each location. So our last example in this section is an educational client who was looking for some help in ingesting transcripts and other admissions documents for their prospective clients. Now, these documents directly represented an income stream, so the decision was made to perform the functions on site. Now, they already had an enterprise repository and capture system in place, but they were not optimized for batch ingestion of documents. They were scanning one page, one document at a time. So we really took a look at that and found a way to revamp their processes using their existing technology. So we set them up with a process to intake the envelopes and packages directly from the mail stream. we automatically opened the envelopes and extracted the contents. Now, after that, we inserted the only pure manual step of validating the originals. Now, this was to meet an internal business rule because original transcripts follow a different workflow downstream from copies. Original transcript stamps are frequently a raised seal, so confidence was not high enough to recognize that during an automated scan step, which is why we instituted that process. So after the validation, the documents followed a similar scan and data extraction process to the earlier examples. The data is moved downstream for their team to perform the actual transcript evaluations. Now, important to note here is that the client was using highly skilled labor to perform these tasks manually. With the new capture process in place, they were able to repurpose that staff to perform the tasks that better met that skill set. So, in terms of real-world dollars, when does it make sense to use intelligent data capture? Well, to make this calculation, you need to understand how much it's costing you today to process documents, how much time is spent in data entry, validation and verification, and document review or quality assurance. That will give you a baseline cost that you can move forward with. Once you have that, you can set your target accordingly. But what should that target be? So here we have a comparison between a fully manual data entry model and an OCR extracted model. So for the manual model, we're assuming a couple of things. We're assuming manual data entry of 5 fields, approximately 10 characters per field, and a manual validation or verification step, and then an audit review step at the end of it. Now, and for the automated model, we're using the same parameters in terms of field information. But from an extraction standpoint, we're going to assume that 50% of the extracted data will be correct and have a high enough confidence level that manual data validation will not be necessary. And for 35% of it, we're going to assume that the extracted data will require some correction of an average of 10 characters per document, and then 15% of the index values we're going to assume will not be extracted at all. And that's going to need to be hand-keyed completely. Now, these numbers are fairly standard in our experience with regards to semi-structured to unstructured documents. Now, as you can see, we ran the cost comparison using several different hourly rates to show that the reduction is not going to be based on the hourly rate. Since we're also using some manual step in the automated process, the results are going to be similar. So what we found was that the average cost reduction is just over 60% in a side-by-side comparison in the per document model. Now, when we move on to the per field model, we find a similar reduction. But this is a head-to-head comparison. Now, in a real-world application, however, you're also going to have to consider hardware and software costs, as well as professional services and installation. So, and that would be if you're using, obviously, an on-site model. Now, in terms of a real-world comparison, here we have a comparison of costs using a project set of approximately 100,000 documents. The technology cost that we're assuming here is 25 cents per document and 2 cents per document for manual data entry. The threshold for OCR technology to reduce the cost is going to be driven by a couple of things. It's going to be driven by the number of index fields to be captured and the number of characters within that index field, and then the cost to deploy the OCR technology. Now, in this model, we see that the threshold for implementing OCR would occur when the project requires 5 or more index fields per document to be captured. Now, each project is going to be different in terms of threshold, but this analysis is what should be done when making a determination of this type. So this is especially helpful when you're leveraging a partner they can definitely give you this kind of an ROI type document so you can see exactly does this process make sense for you now within your project. So with this, we're going to backtrack a little bit. We're going to talk about that initial step of what kind of model should you use. Should you do it internally or should you outsource it to an external partner? What should you do? So how do you make that determination? Well, we look at the pros and cons. So under the pros for internal, you have maintained the complete control of the implementation, and then that implementation is occurring within your environment, and your IT can control the install. So for a lot of clients, that's a plus. We're also going to see how that could sometimes be a little bit of a challenge during the install. The cons would be, you have to bear the entire cost for that implementation. So you'll have to bear the cost for the hardware, the software, the training, project management. You might need to transition from some existing legacy systems that are already in place. And depending on the age of those systems, that transition itself could be costly. And then as the need to scale up or scale down arises, you'll need to purchase additional elements to keep pace. So more equipment, more licenses, upgrades, potentially security patches. And then you need to have the talent on site to manage both the implementation and the steady state operations. Now, as I said earlier, some of the pros are that, your IT does control the install, but that could also be a bit of a challenge as well. And the reason for that is that many IT departments just don't have the experience with these type of complex systems to install them smoothly. So that actually could extend your installation costs even further. So in terms of determining an offsite model, some of the pros are that you're going to get more value over time. You're going to get more bang for your buck in an offsite model. As new technology comes online, it's applied to your project seamlessly. So you're going to get the upgrades, the security patches, without actually having to manage that process yourself. And then you're going to have access to a pool of subject matter experts to help onboard new projects. You can scale up or scale down with demand, and then the functions are performed off-site. Now, I know we spoke earlier that, it's great to have the functions performed on-site, but sometimes you really need those things done off-site, because some documents, like your HR documents or compensation documents, may need to be captured away from existing employees for security reasons. Now, on the minus side, it's really the main reason is really political risk, right? Because some people may not be comfortable with the offsite model. There may be a feeling that offsite production may be less secure. What we found, though, is that many of the offsite implementations are wrapped with more security than what's done typically on-site, because they have to meet all of the regulations and all of the guidelines.
Gary, I do see that we have a write-in question. Let me read this to you. As I consider this for my company, what is the cost differential I can expect for in-house versus outsourcing?
Now, the exact number is going to differ a little bit depending on the size and scope of your implementation. But what we've seen is generally there is a 20% cost differential between an offshore or off-site implementation versus an on-site implementation. And that's mainly because of the hardware and software costs, the startup costs that are involved with doing it on-site.
Thanks, Gary.
So, success story. Here we have a global financial services firm. They are one of the largest consumer credit agencies in the world. Now, they needed to maintain their high customer service levels in processing unemployment claims while improving their management operations, and of course, they also wanted to lower their costs. So they needed to find a way to upgrade their document ingestion. So the solution here was to re-engineer the processes that supported the claims-related correspondence. So we added some technology on the front end to help validate the documents when we actually receive them. And then we moved the necessary manual data entry steps to offshore processing centers. So this was a way that we couldn't get rid of some of those manual steps, but we moved them to a place where they would have less cost impact. Now this is an example where the solution involves both technology and process changes. So what happened? So as a result, costs were cut by approximately $1 million over 18 months, which was huge. So the client was very happy. And then processing times themselves were reduced by as much as 2 days end to end. Now, because of the front-end changes, they were able to also save dollars on the postage cost as well. Now, we'll show you how that works in another webcast. So look for that one. So how do you implement this? How do you get started? How do you move through the process? Well, in leveraging a partner, you want to be sure that they have a reliable model for shepherding you through the implementation process. So here we have the Canon approach in a nutshell. It comprises 3 phases, pre-implementation, an implementation, and handover phase. Now there's a decision gate between the phases to ensure a smooth transition. All stakeholders must sign off before the project can move to the next phase. So that's what we call a decision gate. And each facet of the project is documented with total transparency, with nothing left to interpretation or chance. By the handover phase, all the operational personnel are 100% up to speed on the technology. They sign off on the technology and the processes. And then we perform audits at intervals after the handover to ensure that those high levels of service are maintained throughout the project. Now, if you'd like more information on our approach, my contact information is going to be presented at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to reach out to me and we can look at this more in depth. So here is a representation of how our resources are deployed for a project. The implementation manager will coordinate with the resources shown according to the project plan to move the implementation through the decision gates. It's really important to have a complex resource pool, as many implementations need several disciplines to be completed on time and on budget. As you can see within our organization, we're leveraging solution engineers, our subject matter experts, as well as our best practices, our Six Sigma team, our training and development team. Our operations team is always looped into the process so that everyone is up to speed on any new project. So what are some key points to remember from this? The first point is identification. That's the most important. What are the business processes that are labor-intensive, paper-based, or causing you customer pain? What information coming in do you need to capture, and what is going to be driving your workflow? And then you want to perform an assessment. What are your current costs? What ways could your processes be optimized? Remember, this is an opportunity to both improve your service levels and reduce costs. So yes, reducing costs is going to be your primary. We definitely understand that, but this is also an opportunity to improve your business. And then you want to find a partner, preferably one that has proven experience to shepherd you through this process as seamlessly and painlessly as possible. And with that, I think I've...
Thank you, Gary, and that does conclude our program. We're ready to take some questions. Gary, I do see we have a question around security, data security. The question reads, how do you offer security between my company and others to ensure nothing gets intermingled?
Well, what our company does is that we actually separate the inbound document streams from one company to another company. So we use secure storerooms, and so we separate the documents there. And on intake, what we do is we asset tag each container. So whether it be a tube, if we're talking about documents, or boxes, each gets a unique tag. And that tag actually triggers the workflow. So there's really no way for anybody to scan or move documents around without it being entered into the tracking system. So we use, in a nutshell, we're using two systems. We're using the physical separating of the documents themselves, and then we're using an electronic tag to make sure that during the process, no workflow items are commingled or scanned into the wrong project.
Thank you, Gary. And if you want to follow up on that, certainly you can reach out to us and we can further explain our security measures. I do have another question here, a writing question. What is the typical time frame to implement this? We don't have any software and I'm considering a partner to help us.
That's an excellent question. That's actually a very common question when we talk to our prospective clients. Now, the implementation time is really going to depend on your model. Now, if you're looking at an off-site model, the implementation time is generally 30 days or less. So because the technology, the hardware and software is already in place, really the majority of that time is spent just learning your business rules, your processes, and finding out what are those downstream systems that you're trying to drive. Now, if we're looking at an on-site implementation, now that takes a little bit longer. So you're looking at a 60 to 90-day implementation depending on the complexity of your project and then those security controls that we'll have to navigate when we're on site. See, with those, we're going to have to sit with your IT directors, and we're going to have to go through your information security process just to make sure that that the installation itself is going to be performed seamlessly. Hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you, Gary. Are there any other questions among our audience today? I think, okay. So I believe we have another write-in question. I don't know if we're ready. We have some time here, so most of us, what makes CBPS different than their competitors in this space?
That would actually depend on the competitor. One of the things that we like about our offering is really, if you remember back a couple of slides in terms of our approach as well as our talent pool. One of the things that really differentiates us in the marketplace is that we're able to put so many subject matter experts into the mix when we're onboarding a new project. And our talent pool are one of the most credentialed talent pool. Just about everyone on our SME team is certified in various aspects. So we have our document imaging specialists, we have implementation specialists, project managers, we have content management professionals. We even have an attorney on our team. So we're able to leverage a lot of intelligence when we're coming in on a new project.
Thank you, Gary. And I'm not seeing any other questions come through. And with that, that concludes today's program. For those of you that sent in questions during the program, thank you very much. We love to get your questions. And we hope you found today's insights helpful. Intelligent data capture can be applied to your business successfully when you have a solid understanding of the technology, efficient processes, and its application. If you have any additional questions for Gary, please see his contact information here on the screen. We'd be happy to follow up with you and discuss how we can help. We also have some exit questions as you leave us today. We would appreciate your feedback about today's program, so please complete those questions for us. We'd appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon. Have a great day.